All right. So I love this image. It conjures a whole bunch of different thoughts, and certainly, I'm sure many come to mind. I know that maturity as a word, sometimes depending on the group that you're part of or with, is sometimes used as a bit of an insult, like, you're acting immature, right? And you hear that word a lot. And really, the word mature in and of itself just means complete. So if something is mature, it just means it's full, right? So if you're picking apples, if you pick an immature apple, it's going to be very sour and hard and not good. But if a mature apple, complete and full in every way, will be delicious and sweet, like Honeycrisp. The best apple. That's just my opinion.
Mine too.
They're delicious. But conversely, we think about immaturity. What's immaturity? Well, immaturity is really just incomplete, right? So it's a work in progress. Can anybody identify with being a work in progress? I know I can. I identify far too clearly with some of that implications. I was thinking about this and thinking about subject matter, right? As it comes to certain audiences, as you share different things, right? So if there were something maybe you said to a group of middle schoolers, something might be common, ordinary, and altogether boring for adults, would conjure a whole bunch of discomfort and writhing, maybe some laughing, I don't know, some words like that, right? And so when you think about that and you hear, oh, they're immature, and, certainly that's true to some extent, but really it's less about that. It's more about having a life experience, right? It's not normalized for them, so they don't have the exposure that you and I have had, having the privilege of seeing a few more Christmases than them. And so, with that, we think about, the question often comes up, it's like, well, are children more mature than adults, and are children better than adults, or are adults better than children? And certainly, there's a lot of content that I'm not going to unpack with all of that, but one thing I wanted to think about as we looked at this is in the book of Ephesians. So a little bit will be in the book of Ephesians. We'll be in chapter 4. Paul does a fantastic job really helping to build up and grow someone in their faith, and the church of Ephesus was no different here. So as I think about that, we might think about something where immaturity often has a pinnacle or a changing point, where basically a point of no return. I think of a couple different things where we've seen this in cinema even. At the very beginning of Home Alone, we see the young Kevin being a bit of a cantankerous, insulting young man who is just very difficult to get along with, and there's a lot of impressions placed on him. It's like, oh, you can't do anything, you'd never be able to handle anything, right? And there's a lot of uncomfortable things said to Kevin. And throughout his experience, right, defending his home and ultimately staying alive and buying Tide and all the things that he does as part of his journey, when he comes home, you see when his mom comes to the door, about 5 minutes before the parents, that she had just waited for the flight. But in any event, the coming home, that moment when mom sees Kevin and Kevin just sees mom, and you see you're seeing a different Kevin than you saw in the beginning of the movie. And the reason for that is because he had his mortality was in question, right? He had some things he had to work through. Or you might think of another example. If anyone's ever read The Hobbit or anyone ever read The Lord of the Rings? Big fan over here. And so I won't spoil it entirely, but just bits and pieces. So Frodo from The Lord of the Rings ultimately goes on a quest and completes his quest, but when he comes home to the Shire, and he's finally back home, and everything he's longed for and wanted wasn't the same. Things didn't seem the same. Memories changed his worldview, and he didn't really find peace again until he moved on and moved forward with his life. And so we're going to see a bit of that when we look at Ephesians here in just a minute. But as I was looking at it, I think a lot of times that this is one of my favorite verses in the Bible, and you don't have to look this one up here, but this one is in the book of James, and I love this, and I pulled the one from the English Standard Version, but it says, "Consider pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. And let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete and not lacking in anything. So the picture here is that life circumstances come at you in such a way that you actually can't move to the next phases of your life until you've had these experiences, and so that you actually persevere through them and are better on the other side. But that's the picture of what James is trying to capture here. Now, certainly it's easy to read, harder to do, right? Whenever we face trials of any kind, the instruction is to have pure joy. I want to go back to that earlier comment. I'm a work in progress, right? So when I have trials that come to me, my first response isn't always that of a delightful butterfly. It's concerned. It's worry tends to creep in, right? So you have these things that are conflicting against us here. But I want to look at in Ephesians here, where we have Ephesians chapter 4, and it's verses 17 through 32. Please hold. Here we are. And he starts like this. He said, "So I will tell you this and insist on it in the Lord, that you must no longer live as the Gentiles do in the futility of their thinking. They are darkened in their understanding and separated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, due to the hardening of their hearts. Having lost all sensitivity, they have given themselves over to sensuality as to indulge in every kind of impurity, with a continual lust for more. You, however, did not come to know Christ that way. Surely you heard of him and were taught in him in accordance with the truth that is in Jesus. You were taught with regard to your former way of life, put off your old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires, to be made new in the attitude of your minds, and to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. Therefore, each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to his neighbor. We are all members of one body, and in your anger do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold. He who has been stealing must steal no longer, but must work, doing something useful with his own hands. They may have something to share with those in need." Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs. That is, benefit those who listen, and do not grieve the Holy Spirit of God, with whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. Get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling, and slander, along with every form of malice. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as Christ God forgave you. So there's a lot in there. And so hopefully I'm going to pull out of there a few themes from that instruction, that encouragement from Paul. So just looking at Ephesians 4:17 here, when we see the futility of their thinking, it actually comes from the Greek word, I think it's metaiotis, defined as what is devoid of a truth and appropriateness, perverseness, depravity, frailty, want of vigor, and some versions even say a vanity of their thinking, right? So this is an incomplete way of thinking because you're only thinking about it as yourself, right? If you were to take your phone, for instance, and take a selfie with a perfect background, right? Everyone would see it and say, "This is the most beautiful picture I've ever seen." Turn their phone ajar to the left and we see the dresser full of clothes, or we look to the right and we see the incomplete kitchen project, or we look to the garbage can, or whatever, right? So, but in our limited thinking or our limited view, we have this incomplete view of the true picture and the true nature of what we're having here. So his encouragement to the Gentiles and to these new believers was that think not of your limited way of thinking. You now have the truth. You have this beautiful, full spectrum view of what the truth is. Dwell on these things. So that's the encouragement here. And so, or maybe it's something as simple or as challenging as, we might think in life where we're presented with a challenge, we think how we can solve it, right? We immediately begin to think of all the ways we can, gather resources or people or energy and try to wrap around fixing it. And Paul is pointing us to even more wholesome thinking, not the way of the world, which promotes this counterfeit God, or the idol of self, and the entitlement that comes from that thinking. So the picture here is that he's wanting us to remember that we're not saved to be like the world, but to be saved from the world so that we can be in the world, not of the world, being the light of Christ. And so I transition that into verse 18 where it talks about the darkening, right? And so you think darkening, you think that, a lot of different images. You think of walking into a room with the lights off, certainly that's dark. But this is actually speaking to a darkness in mind, or a darkness in the absence of seeing clearly with truth. So when you see the verse where it talks about the hardened hearts, we might remember talking about Pharaoh, where he continually had his heart hardened against the Israelites, and God allowed it, enabled it, then ultimately persuaded it upon them. Well, why? Why was he allowing this to happen? Well, because there was such grand opposition to God, he gave Pharaoh exactly what he wanted: separation from the guidance and the love of God. So when we continue to live our lives in such a way, after we are in faith in Christ, as if nothing has happened and our lifestyle choices look no different than the rest of the world, how can we possibly imagine that God can use us? That might mean arguing needlessly in the Facebook comments, or choosing to add that one last comment in an argument, just so you can have the last word. But that one word can be the very thing that is driving your relationship apart, right? And so I think about that. We were talking recently about in a Bible study I was with this Friday, and we were just sharing different things about where other husbands and wives were talking about different things, and we're saying, one of the comments that was brought up is, how many people have ever won an argument with their spouse and actually won? Nobody. If you win an argument with your spouse, no one's winning here. Okay, something has happened that won't be the same after that moment. So I try to lose every fight just so I can be a good husband. And so verse 19 talks a little bit about the entrapments of greed and seeking to self-soothe financially. And so we worked through that a little bit last week. Verses 20 through 24, he's talking about getting rid of the attitude which is full of deceit, and replace it with the attitude of God, which is holy and righteous. Now this is interesting. The Greek word apate, which is the same name given to the Greek mythology goddess of deceit, is the word that's being used here. Well, what is deceit? Well, it's the misrepresentation of the truth. Easy enough, right? We all understand what a lie is. One could deduce it's merely a lie, but it's more sinister than that. There's a deeper underscore to this sort of deceit. It's more often an elaborate web of lies, hooked to partial truths, in which the greatest lies are woven and conceived by the masses. So some of the best lies ever told and believed are ones that have just a little bit of truth in it to give it the fuel it needs to get the traction it needs to get out there. And so you might hear this now referred to as a conspiracy, right? There might have been something, an event in time that took place that was true, did happen, and then there is an argument that comes from this side, and then from this side, and then all of a sudden there is these deep, deep rabbit holes who've done nothing but point you so far from what actually took place and from God, you've wasted both your time and their time by entertaining those types of thinking. So the idea is, for us, we're called to an overwhelming sense of authenticity, and showered both in grace and peace. So for us as Christians, that means we're to be uncompromisingly honest. No white lies, no bending the truth or hyperbole or sarcasm. Yikes, that's a tough one. Who here struggles with sarcasm? I do. I don't want to, but I do. And so that is a form of a lie, right? Because you're taking something and like, hey, would you like this sandwich? And it's a sandwich that you definitely don't like. You're like, yeah, I'd love that sandwich, right? It's very easy to do, right? But what you're doing is you're behaving and thinking and speaking exactly like the world, right? And God's calling us to a level of higher accountability, a higher level of righteousness that is pure and sweet. And I'm not saying you can't be funny. By all means, be funny and have fun with things. But there comes a point where it goes too far, and you go from being funny to being hurtful. And that's the risk of that sort of authenticity, right? And sometimes you hear people that you know, maybe in just different circles, they'll say, well, I watched this show, and I can watch it because I'm saved, and I don't have to worry about my salvation. Well, that's true. That might be true. You don't have to worry about your salvation. You can watch it. But is it going to further your ability to have a meaningful moral authority with loved ones and friends. Yikes, right? So we think about this, right? Maybe you're at a family gathering and people are talking about a show that's the hot new show, everybody's watching it, and it's great, and I don't have to name them, there's so many awful ones. So we'll think of any of them. And you like, okay, well maybe I'll check it out. I'll go to, Goodreads, or I'll go to, what's the other one? Where do we go look up things? That's the one, Common Sense Media. You go there, I'm going to do some cliff notes and kind of see if this is a safe thing for me to consume. You check it out, and you know pretty quickly, I shouldn't even be reading the cliff notes about the cliff notes, because this is awful, right? And so you have to be the different one in the room to say, this isn't something I can participate in, right? You don't have to say anything judgmental or bad about them. Say, yeah, that's not my cup of tea. It's something I'm not comfortable with. It doesn't really stand with my beliefs. And so I think about a moment. This happened recently with my lovely wife, and there was an opportunity for her to participate in a book club, and she was encouraged to join. And she's like, and it's a good friend, and wanted to check it out, and just a great way to meet someone and spend time with people. And she's like, here's the book we're going to read. And so Josh goes to Common Sense Media. She looks it over. She's like, I hate everything about this. She's like, there's no way. And she wrestled with this because she wants to forge this friendship, right? She doesn't want to be something that separates them because of this thing, right? So she's like, well, do I subject myself to this content so I can somehow meet them? And after a lot of just wrestling and praying and just thinking about it and kind of talking about it, she sent this beautiful text to her friend, just because we needed to talk to her in person, but just couldn't connect. Kept on missing, 2 ships in the night. It's like, I didn't want to send this to you by text. Sends this beautiful text about how, basically, I definitely would like to be considered for other books. I read a little bit about this, and I just don't, I can't, for me, she may have used words like, I don't want to be a stick in the mud, or maybe I'm a square, fun things like that. But it was a really sweet way for her to put that line in the sand. And what that did for her, actually, was this beautiful response from her friend who is not a Christian, but immediately was like, oh my gosh, I didn't like the book either. I just picked it up, and then I felt awful thinking about other people having to read it too. So yeah, we'll pick something different next time. So they're going to see it through, and they'll finish their club. And Joss is going to take a bite on this one. And then I just thought about how, in no way was she disrespectful to her friend. In no way did she try to minimize her faith system or to insult herself for having these convictions. Right? It's easy to do, right? It's easy to go out there and say, well, I'm just a boring nobody. I don't want to participate in that. I'm a holy roller. Things like that, right? And it's sweet when we can have that moment to say, this does not align with my values. I'm so sorry. I love you. Just do something else. And we can talk about that. So that was one picture of that. So we move on to the next bucket of verses here in 25 and 28. It says, do not anger in your sin. Man, what are some examples of this? We have so many. Maybe you're feeling personally attacked by somebody or something someone has said to you, and instead of taking your frustration and your anger to God, say, God, I'm so hurt because they said this thing to me, this situation took place, and I'm so hurt by it. You respond with a very well-crafted, cut to the core insult or injury that cuts them so deeply that even if they recover from the insult, they'll never look at you the same again. Right? Or maybe you don't even have to think about it. There's just a vitriol sitting at the back of your tongue, ready to lash out at a moment's injury. Our responsibilities as a mature Christian is to turn the other cheek, so to speak, meaning in our personal offense. It means we just may have to eat it and offer forgiveness when it's even more uncomfortable to do so. But in the same way as freely Jesus offered it to us, right? A picture of this would be if we hang on to these things that entrap us, that I'm good in all these areas. Maybe I give regularly. Maybe I'm just someone who cares for others. I pray with people. I read the Bible. And there's this one little corner, and it's this corner of your life. It's your anger corner, and no one's allowed in it because it's too fussy. You think of it this way. So imagine maybe you're running in a field away from, we'll say, a ball, some sort of assailant. We'll say it's a creature. We'll say it's a wolf, and you're running away from this wolf. And you're like, okay, I'm going to run away because this is a wolf. He's trying to get me. This isn't great. Who wants to be chased by a wolf? I don't, unless they're friendly. Then maybe you can pet them, I don't know. So you're running away from this wolf, and you find a tree, like, oh, thank God, I can climb this tree. I'm pretty sure wolves can't climb. I don't think, right? And you're running through this in your mind, like, well, there was something that could climb a tree. Could they climb? Either way, you're running up to the tree, and you get up to the first couple branches, and you're in there, and you're like, your body, 98% of you is totally in the clear, right? And you're totally fine. And you're like, okay, I'm free. And all of a sudden, you feel this bite on your foot, right? That's just a very small part of your body. No harm. 98% of me is fine, so I'll be okay, right? What happens to the wolf? Well, they have very sharp teeth and they're very strong. Before you know it, they've pulled you down to the ground with them. So even though most of you was surrendered or most of you is safe, this one little stronghold that the enemy had over you has prevented you from having that full safety and that full release from the enemy. So we need to be thinking about that as we think about these corners of our life that we're not willing to give up to Him. You know, whether it's your finances or whether it's your frustrations or peril or just maybe you have this anxiety that is so overwhelming that you can't see the world any other way, and it's taking you and it's taken hold of your outlook, and it's the first thing you think, not the primary narrative being, I'm going to trust in God that He'll deliver me from this tough space, and that's where I want us to be. And so lastly, we think about the unwholesomeness, or the last type of language that we see here, or the unwholesome language here, verses 29 through 32. And whenever I think wholesome, I literally think of like one of two things when I think of wholesome. I think of like, I will typically always think of Leave It to Beaver, because what was more wholesome than Leave It to Beaver? Not because I was old enough to watch it, but I did see it on TV Land, in syndication, and we watched it a lot. We weren't allowed to watch a lot of things. Leave It to Beaver we could watch, right? And if we think about it, though, we think about the unwholesomeness, it literally means this rotten, putrid, corrupted, no longer fit for use. And this has to do with how we talk about others, what we say about others when they're not around, what information we choose to share with others without their permission or benefit. Right? So it's one thing to share a need that someone has and say, I have a friend who needs prayer in this area. And maybe they haven't released you to give the details. So you're not going to give the details. You're going to say, I have this friend who wants prayer, and we're just going to cover them. But if, on the side, you're like, hey, did you hear about Susie? It's crazy what happened. I'm going to tell you all about it, right? That desire to divulge more than you've even given permission to divulge, right? It's that same sort of thinking. Or if you had you wouldn't take a rotten baked potato and prepare it with, all of the fixings and bake it and then serve it on a platter and say, I have cooked this perfectly, it's beautiful, here's this rotten potato. Even though it's prepared well, the heart of it is still rotten. So the idea is you wouldn't want to participate in that. So don't be easily deceived by things that are maybe just look all dressed up. So what do we do with all that? All right, so I put together just a couple things to be thinking about as we think about a path to spiritual maturity. So just chunking out each of our sections here. The first part was thinking about the futility of our thinking. So that means that we're going to trust in God, not self, for He is complete in every way. We aren't. All right, so that's the first thing. Right? So if we're thinking about, if I'm going to measure to be complete or mature in my thinking, I'm going to trust in God, which is easy to do in word, harder to do in action, but you can all do it, I believe you. The next one is looking at our darkening of your mind, right? And how we can be persuaded against that. So this is a little trickier, but something that came to mind for this was, once you're in the truth, you can't ignore what you know to be true for convenience or ease. And so an example of that might be, maybe there was something in your past life that you always participated in. Maybe it was a show, or maybe it was an activity with friends that you would do. And you now know the truth. Before you didn't know it was wrong, so you just did it, right? We didn't hang out with my buddies, we were just going to do this thing or whatever. But now that you're in the truth, and you know it to be wrong, you can't just go back to the old way, because that just ignores what you know. And God is calling us to a higher level of accountability here in maturity. Because I'm in the truth, and I'm in the light, I need to be of the light and in the truth. I can't just, out of convenience sake, make these little, well, it's fine this one time. I still love Jesus. It'll be fine if I do this one thing with these friends. No one's going to know. It's not like, anyone with my church is there. Side note, no one from your church is there. Should you be doing it? I'm kidding. No, it's just the point is, it's very easy to get ensnared back into the world. The world is that wolf running after you, right? And he's looking for that toe to be sticking out of the tree. The next thing is to be honest, right? This sounds easier. Well, I'm a Christian. I always tell the truth. I don't know, maybe. I hope that you do. It's be honest and forthright in all things and conceal nothing, as nothing is concealed from Jesus. So that doesn't mean divulge everything about your entire life at all times to everyone who's around you. There's a measure of discretion. Certainly everyone doesn't need to know all of your business at all times. But when asked about something that you're going through, try not to minimize or to take away from that moment, because oftentimes something so intense and so severe that you're going through is actually going to be a breath of fresh air for someone else. It's going to be like, oh my gosh, I'm going through the same exact thing. I thought I was the only one who struggled with this, right? The enemy wants us to be alone in these silos, thinking we're the only ones who struggle with our money, with anxiety, with family relationships, right? But when you get out in front of it and you say, no, I'm struggling with this. I'm having a hard time forgiving my brother for what he said. I'm having a hard time forgiving my sister for what she said, right? Those types of truths, that's when real change starts to come into the picture here. So that's what we're looking for, is it to be full of integrity in that way. And I always loved it. My dad, when I was younger, I asked him, so what does integrity mean? And he's like, well, integrity is doing the right thing when no one is looking. And I was like, yikes. That's something to live by, right? So that's where that comes from, is to be honest and forthright in all of our doings. The next one is to control your anger. Super easy, right? If you find that you can't control your anger, no judgment. It just means you're human. Congrats, you've done it. But ask for help. Don't go at it alone, right? Pray for help from a friend. Get accountability. There's so much beauty that comes into the picture when you're saying, I'm struggling with my anger against this person. I'm struggling with micro frustrations with everything because of this other bigger thing, right? That's now bled into every other facet of my life. So now I'm characterized as an angry guy or an angry girl. Anger is real, and it's something we all have to contend with. And the instruction we're given is to be angry and sin not. So the picture there is to be frustrated, but I love what it says also in James that the anger that we produce does not produce the type of anger that God produces, which is righteousness. Our anger does not produce righteousness, in case you're wondering. Now, there might be from time to time if someone comes to you and says, "This is righteous anger," maybe you get out of their way. They're probably really upset, and so think about that. If they're coming at you with that, maybe listen and see what they have to say, assuming they're not, harming themselves or others. And so lastly is this last piece here about the unwholesome words and the right language to use towards others is really just a picture of use life-giving words in all situations, not life-taking words. So an example of a life-giving word, when someone has frustrated you, and the response would be to be, I'm really angry you did this to me, or whatever choice words you might choose. You can say things like, I see that you're frustrated. Your words are hurting me right now, so I need some space to control my thoughts before I come back to this. It's okay to excuse yourself if you're not ready to have those tough conversations. But it's encouraged that we build one another up. It's very easy to discourage or to insult. Maybe you see somebody wearing something on TV and you're like, oh, I can't believe they're wearing that. It looks ridiculous, right? Or you have that measure of judgment that's comes so quick to our minds, because as humans we're so faulty in that way, and we need to have that picture of Christ who loves us, and because He loved us first, even while we were just as we are now, sinners, He came and He died for us. And so we have that beautiful hope to say, Jesus didn't come to me and for us once I had it all figured out. He came to me just as I am, asking that I would surrender myself to Him so I could have everlasting life with Him. And so that's our belief. Our belief and our hope is that Jesus died and rose again, and that Jesus is Lord, and that He rose on the third day, and that He's still alive now. So our faith is knowing that Jesus, who paid it all to fight against these things, is the very same Jesus who we have to pray to now in our time of prayer and time of need. So that's our very informal path to spiritual maturity. There's a lot more, right? But this was easy enough. And then this is our closing thought here for just the last verse. Really love this. I want this to be our takeaway from today, is to get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as Christ God forgave you. So it's easy to say, I'm going to forgive, well, Jesus forgave me, so I'm going to forgive you. Well, Jesus forgave us by dying for us. So I want you to have that mindset. If something is so severe and so intense, there's no way I could possibly forgive this person for this sin. You can, because Christ forgave us in the midst of our sea of iniquities against Him. I'm not saying you have to trust that person or like that person even, but the forgiveness that comes from that, the beauty that comes from those types of releases is going to benefit you and your testimony, and you'll help to encourage others to do the same and live in peace. So let's close in prayer this morning. Father, we thank you so much for our time together this morning in your word. I pray that you would take these truths and write them on our hearts, and that we would walk away changed and mindful, and that we would be people who represent Christ well in the midst of the world, not that we would go out into the world and be like the world and give people no reason to ask us what's different about us. Cause us to be a people of hope, a people of courage, a people of kindness, compassion, and standing up for what's right, and that we would see people the way that you see them, in great need of you. So I pray that you would just burden our heart for others, that we would be people who are on mission to serve you and to love you and to find others, to want to know and to be more like you. So please give us the courage, please give us the wherewithal and the stamina to fight the good fight and to do the things that you've called us to do as believers. And we just thank you so much for all these things this morning. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.